A kerosene lamp swung over the water, and the boat rocked like it was breathing. The bow rope should have been still, but it slid a finger width at a time, feeding itself into the black current. The flame bent toward the river, as if something below was inhaling it, and the rope knots tightened without a hand to pull them. From under the hull came 3 slow taps, patient and close. No one along that stretch of the delta crossed after the last temple bell unless hunger had teeth. That night, hunger did, and the ferryman's apprentice, Hui, stood on wet planks with debt in his pocket and rain erasing the moon. He pushed off with a bamboo hook polished by years of hands, and the pole vanished into water the color of bruised tea. The river resisted, not like a current, but like a person leaning back. A clump of water hyacinth drifted past the boat, except it moved against the flow, sliding upstream as if it remembered somewhere it needed to be. When it vanished, the silence left behind sounded heavier than rain. The kitchen sat high on stilts, safe from ordinary floods, but not from stories. A thin line of salt and uncooked rice crossed the doorway, laid down without a word. In the lamp's low light, that line looked too bright, like something sharpened. The house dog stared at it and refused to step over, even when called. Hui's mother tied a red thread around his wrist, knotting it 3 times, then pressed a small paper charm into his palm. "Do not answer if the water calls," she said, as if it was law. "If someone asks for a ride home from the bank after dark, keep moving. If you hear your name from the river, bite your tongue and let it pass." Before sunrise, the first cost arrived. A neighbor's little boy did not return from checking traps, and his conical hat was found floating near the reeds, turning in place like it was waiting. The hat did not drift downstream. It circled the same patch of muddy water until a man waded in, and then it slid away from his reach, teasing him deeper. The elders did not argue about what it meant. They repeated the old warning the way people repeat a proverb, "Ma da keo gyo," the water ghost pulls your leg. By afternoon, the monsoon arrived hard enough to flatten banana leaves, and the canal path turned to slick clay. Hai walked the narrow raised edge between water and rice field, and each step made a wet sucking sound that felt too loud. At the bend where the canal widened, the surface trembled in a neat circle, even though no wind touched it. Tiny bubbles rose, popped, and left behind the faint smell of damp rope in a closed jar. That night, the rice merchant arrived soaked and impatient, talking about missed deliveries as if they were a sickness. Hui did not want to take him, but his father lay in bed with a knee gone bad, and debt never listens to taboos. The merchant stepped into the boat, and his umbrella dripped steadily, tick, 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 like a clock. Hui kept his eyes on the water and his hand on the bamboo hook. Halfway across, the lamp flame leaned sideways, not with wind, but with attention. In the quiet that followed, a child's voice rose from the water beside the boat and said Hui's name as if it had always known it. Hui's jaw tightened. The name tried to climb out of his mouth, but he kept it behind his teeth. The bow rope snapped tight, and the boat's nose turned a few degrees toward the sound without being steered. 3 taps came again, closer than before, and the water dimpled as if a face had pressed up from below. The voice asked for a ride home, politely, like a stranger speaking through a doorway. Hui pushed hard with the hook, and the pole struck something soft, then slid away. When he pulled it up, river weeds clung to it like hair. The merchant whispered a prayer and stared at the water as if it might look back. When the boat reached the far bank, the merchant stumbled out without thanks. He paid quickly, eyes down, and the bills were damp as if they had been kept somewhere wrong. By the time Hui returned, the salt and rice line at the doorway had been pressed flat in one spot. Not swept aside, not scattered, just tested, like a wet foot had stepped there and then thought better. A single wet footprint sat on the boards inside the threshold, toes pointed toward the dark of the house. The footprint ended there, as if the rest of the body had been removed. Hui's mother lit incense and watched the smoke. It rose straight for a breath, then bent toward the floorboards like it had found a draft that was not air. She washed Hui's ankle with salt water. A faint bruise ringed his skin like a rope mark, fresh and round. By late morning, the missing boy was found, and no one said how. People only said the river gave him back, and they spoke that phrase like it was not mercy. One detail traveled faster than grief. Rope fiber around the ankle, tied in a knot none of the fishermen claimed. The elder burned the knot, and the smoke smelled sweet for a second, then rotten. Under a banyan tree near the ferry sat a small shrine to the river lord, crowded with half-burned incense and wilted flowers. The elder who tended it spoke softly, because shouting near water was another kind of calling. A cup of tea on the shrine rippled in perfect circles, though the air was still. A thin strand of waterweed lay across the shrine steps, placed like a warning. The elder told Hui one rule that mattered most: never let the river hear the answer it wants. For 2 days, Hui stayed away from the ferry. Then his father's fever rose, and the healer's herbs were said to be across the river, and duty pulled like a hook. Hai returned at dusk, with money wrapped in cloth and the charm clenched in his fist. He drew a fresh salt line across the boat planks around his feet, a thin white border like a doorway. For a few minutes, the water stayed quiet, and that quiet felt like a trick. Then the water hyacinth came again, drifting upstream to gather around the hull, bumping it softly, as if trying to keep the boat from leaving. The bamboo hook snagged on something below. Hui pulled, expecting a branch, but the resistance felt like cloth, patient and heavy. He let go. The moment he did, the bow rope snapped tight, and the bruise on his ankle burned like it had been touched. The child's voice returned from ahead, from the far bank, calling in the tone of someone waving from home. It said Hui's name twice, and the second time it sounded closer. Hui bit his tongue until he tasted copper. He pushed with the hook, muscles shaking, and the boat crept forward. The salt line darkened in one spot, smudged from below, as if wetness had seeped up through the boards to touch it. Under the lamp, a long shadow moved beneath the surface and stopped directly under Hui. The lamp flame pointed straight down. The glass chimney fogged from the inside, and a thin line of moisture ran down it like a tear. Hui threw the red thread charm into the water. It hit the surface and did not float. It sank as if something had been waiting with an open hand. For one heartbeat, the river released. The hyacinth ring loosened, the bow rope slackened, and the boat's nose turned back toward the current, like a person changing their mind. Hui forced the boat to the far bank and stumbled onto mud that held him up. He did not look back until he was several steps away, and when he did, the water was calm again, as if it had learned how to pretend. The healer crossed back with him before night fully settled. Hui's father survived the fever, and everyone called it luck. No one called it payment. That night the paper charm was gone, and the skin of Hui's palm was damp and cold, as if the river had left a fingerprint. Hui's mother swept the house and laid fresh salt and rice, then hung a small bell at the doorway. She said the bell would warn them if something crossed the threshold. The bell did not ring. That was what made the sound so wrong. 3 slow taps came from inside the house, from the bottom of the water jar. The jar's surface rippled, and a single bubble rose and popped like a quiet laugh. The salt line at the doorway depressed in that same spot, as if an unseen wet foot tested it and held there. The dog pressed against Hui's leg and shook, eyes fixed on empty air. By evening, word traveled that the rice merchant planned to cross again at night, to prove the stories were only for children. He came to the landing with a grin and 2 men who kept their faces turned from the water. The elder shouted. Hui's mother grabbed the merchant's sleeve. The river answered by gathering. Water hyacinth slid upstream and packed the shallow edge, laying a green carpet over mud that should have been firm. The merchant stepped forward, boots sinking, then yanked back as if stung. He took one more step to show the village he was not afraid. Something yanked hard, and the man vanished downward without a splash, as if the river had opened a mouth and closed it. The umbrella landed open on the planks, trembling. No one went in after him, and no one said his name. For days the village spoke carefully. They said the river had taken payment, and payment had chosen a man who thought warnings were only words. The ferry stayed closed after dark. Children stopped playing on the bank unless an adult stood close enough to grab their collar. For a while, the taps stopped. The lamp flame stood straight, and the dog stepped over the threshold line again, careful but willing. Then, on a bright morning that looked harmless, Hui found a wet knot of rope fiber hanging from the bamboo hook. It dripped onto the floorboards in slow, steady drops that did not dry. It had not been there the night before. It did not smell like river rope. It smelled like cloth kept too long in a closed jar. Outside, the river was calm, and the hyacinth drifted downstream like it had always done. But under the stilt floor, 3 slow taps began again, softer than before, and the wet knot tightened itself one twist at a time, as if practicing for the next ankle it would fit.